Hello and welcome to the panel at Dublin Business Innovation Centre. Today is Thursday, March 26th, 2020. It is 2 weeks since schools here in Ireland were closed down completely. It's a little over a week since An Taoiseach Leo Varadkar made his address to the nation indicating the scale of the COVID-19 pandemic problem for the country, and just 2 days since we went into a further stage of lockdown with almost all businesses except essential services closing down. Obviously, this causes a great deal of problems for the startup and scale-up clients of Dublin Business Innovation Centre, and we're here to discuss those problems now and the kind of solutions that are being put in place to address it. I'm going to start with me today. We have a panel of consultants from the Investor Ready programme in Dublin Business Innovation Centre. We have Conor Carmody, Heidi Corr and Majella Murphy. We also have Richard Watson, the principal with the DublinBIC Venture Fund. So you're all very welcome today. Heidi, can I start by asking you, you have been engaging with your DublinBIC startup and scale-up enterprise clients in a COVID-19 safe kind of way for the last number of weeks. What are the challenges facing startups and scale-ups as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I've received quite a few calls and I've spoken to a lot of clients, and I'm kind of categorizing the feedback and responses that I'm getting insofar as that some of the companies I'm talking to are thriving and they can't get enough supplies and they can't produce enough, so they're having cash flow issues because of the payment of what is actually needed in stock. And then I've also got those companies and businesses that are currently frozen, that feel everything last week just froze. So what were their challenges? Their challenges, particularly, again, cash flow is the common factor. And then actually this one surprised me a little bit because a lot of them have got market validation going on to affirm their product and their services with the clients at the moment. And what happened last week is everybody just shut the shutters and said, no, we can't do this, especially medical devices that were looking for testing in the medical sector, and also digital marketing were felt to be inappropriate. So they were saying, well, how, what can we do? So this is a time of absolute reflection, and we really will never be the same again when we come out of this. And there is a lot of positivity that will come about, because a lot of what the clients are actually doing, they have to have a look at their value proposition to see the real value that they're now bringing to the clients, and what aspects of our current situation is it that they can focus on. And most of the clients that I've been speaking with, their value proposition includes a benefit that will affect the bottom line and will increase ultimately somebody's profitability. So it's really a case of now how they follow that through. This week we felt a bit of a thaw, people are starting to get into some kind of routine. So communication channels are opening up and we're all getting used to working from home.
There's some great points there, Heidi, and obviously cash flow is front and center for everybody now, but I'm very interested to hear you talk about value proposition as well, that this could actually be an opportunity to look again at your value proposition and maybe to reevaluate and perhaps even to pivot, and we might talk a little bit more about that later. I'm going to throw in one more challenge that I've come across, which is the mental health of people dealing with this and the stresses caused by it, which I've come across again and again with some of our clients. It is very stressful, and really people need to try to maintain perspective, act appropriately on it, but not go over the edge with it.
I agree. I actually, and I was just before I came on, I had a virtual meeting with another client there. And what we were both saying was we're actually finding this week now that we're coming more to terms with what's going on. And obviously when something is out of your control, that's when our legs go wobbly, because typically entrepreneurs like to be in control. And that's what's happening here. But what we need to look at is look at the elements of where we are today and what we can control and how we impact those, and put aside the ones that we can't control, because they will happen anyway, and that's out of our control.
Okay, Majella, if I could come to you.
Yeah.
What are the top tips that we in Dublin Business Innovation Centre are offering to early stage companies now to ensure that they can continue trading and that they can be there for the future opportunities after this passes?
Yeah, so I suppose it can be summarized by saying that, you know, the first thing to do is to inform yourself, okay? And that's to inform yourself of, you know, where your customers are at, where your suppliers are at, what supports are out there. The second thing is to talk, discuss and negotiate, okay, with all of those parties. And the third then is to analyze the options. So if we go through some of the challenges there that Heidi and yourself have brought up, you know, with on the revenue side of things, you know, where sales has stalled, talk to your clients as soon as possible. Understand their position. Can you offer them discounts? Can you give them some other payment facilities? Is there maybe a new pricing model that you could introduce here that would start sales flowing again, just with a different angle? So in terms of the cost model, the first thing to do is to list all your costs from highest to lowest, and categorize them as fixed or variable, and then consider, you know, are those that were traditionally thought of as fixed, are they maybe, you know, negotiable? You know, if you reach out to your suppliers and negotiate with them, try to negotiate those costs downwards, try to seek discounts, try to seek alternatives. We also spoke about cash flow. So, you know, once you've done your revenue, looked at your cost base, have a go at doing another cash flow statement for the next 6 months, given all those changed assumptions that you've come up with. I mentioned also at the beginning, you know, there are supports out there. So educate yourself, understand the, you know, the concessions that the banks are giving, understand, you know, what loan facilities are out there with the likes of SBCI or Microfinance Ireland. Understand what grants and aids are out there from the local enterprise offices and Enterprise Ireland, and understand the criteria. So what would make you qualify for those? I suppose a tip on the loan side of things is really not to forget that a loan still has to be repaid at some point. So not to forget that, and to have some kind of a plan in place to make sure that you can repay that whenever the payment terms kick in. Yeah, and you talked also about mental health and the challenges there. And I suppose, you know, a tip there would be to kind of say to yourself on a regular basis, I'm not alone in this. You know, everyone is facing challenges, and, you know, to try to keep things in perspective, and seek assistance, you know, talk. And that goes, I think, goes for all of the challenges that you're facing. Talk to suppliers, talk to customers, talk to your employees, talk to creditors, talk to competitors even, because they may very well be able to, you know, give you some guidance or tips as to how they're dealing with some of the challenges, and you just never know what that would present for
Majella, can I just add something into that? Because one of the key things that I was finding from speaking to the clients that I've spoken to up to date, they all felt that this week they started to put a structure in place, whether it be with the children, whether it be with the partners, because obviously everyone's in the same boat. So, you know, potentially you have two people working from home in the same house. So, you know, it's about where do you sit, who minds the children, what are the children doing? Are they doing their schoolwork in the morning? Then, you know, is there some kind of activity? So I am finding structure is becoming more and more important, even though you're working from home.
That's a great point, Heidi. And, you know, that kind of negotiating again and talking with your partner and other people in the house as to, you know, what is the daily routine for everyone involved, and how can we make this work? And I suppose recognizing that, as you say, everyone's in the same boat and there's huge understanding. So if you're on a meeting, a call with a supplier or a customer and your child walks in or your dog walks in,
Doesn't matter.
it's kind of acceptable now, kind of. So, just to kind of maybe, try to laugh at things as well a little bit.
Very good. Thank you for that. And if you, the viewer, look down below this video, you'll be able to see some links to some of those supports that Majella mentioned. Richard, I'm going to come to you. You're the principal in the DublinBIC Venture Fund. What is the effect of the pandemic on the investment marketplace? And if you're a startup, scale-up enterprise who's currently in an investment round, what's the likely effect that it's going to have on it?
Yeah, well, like Heidi said, I've had a lot of inquiries. We launched our fund about 4.5-5 months ago, and have engaged with 150 companies, just over 150 companies since we went live. So a lot of them, we're at a very advanced stage, and we've issued a term sheet already. And I suppose companies are asking, is the fund still investing? And I mean, the short answer is, of course, in the longer term, we are investing. It's a long-term fund. The real challenge is, how far do we go before we pull the trigger in terms of making an investment in a company? And that's a difficult one for us to kind of give a straight answer on. Our target customers, our target kind of companies are typically B2B software companies. And so the challenge for us is, what impact does the current situation have on sales cycles? What type of churn what type of churn rate comes out of this in terms of SaaS companies with existing customers? So, the way we're dealing with it is we're really continuing to meet with companies. We're having follow-on meetings and getting into, continuing with detailed due diligence on companies. And really, it just comes down to a matter of timing in terms of when we can see us coming out the other side of this in terms of making investments. I mean, if you look across the broad landscape, there's, in terms of early stage investing in Ireland, you've got, a few seed funds, you've got Enterprise Ireland, and you've got business angels, and of course the accelerators at the pre-seed stage. I mean, all of those really, apart from the angels, have, fixed buckets of money to invest in startups. So that funding isn't suddenly going to be pulled away. It really just comes down to a question of timing of completing investments. And even when you look at VC funds, it really depends on the individual funds and where they are in their life cycle. So if you look at, the funds out there that have, been in the market for several years and they've built up significant portfolios, a lot of those funds would tend to be kind of much more inward looking at their portfolio and segmenting the portfolio into those that, are really going to be facing a crisis in terms of cash burn and deflated sales. To contrast that, then our fund, which we just launched, we don't have any portfolio companies. So really all of our activity is continuing, meeting with companies, having follow-on discussions, and kind of doing the due diligence. So that's kind of, I suppose, some of what's going on in the investment landscape. With business angels, obviously it's a bit more challenging, and I think I'm dealing with a number of companies that we're looking at investing in where there's angel interest as well, and those angels are continuing to do due diligence and having follow-on discussions with companies. But of course, business angels are impacted quite differently in the sense that they have their own equity portfolios that have been severely hammered, and so there will be a slowdown in angel investment, of course, over the next few months.
Richard,
really.
So one of the questions that I've had from a couple of the companies that I'm working with who are very early stage, they're kind of questioning, should I even bother continuing with this? Like everything is just so up in the air, and as Heidi said earlier, nobody wants to validate with me now, and so on and so forth. And my response has kind of been, look, unless this crisis fundamentally changes the business that you're in, if your proposition was valid and viable, beforehand, and if you believed that, then there's no reason to believe otherwise. For the, take it another few months, give it a few months, but actually when this passes, and it will pass, will your proposition still be valid and viable in your view? And if the answer to that is yes, then they should continue, and that's the advice that I'm giving them.
Yeah, no, that's very well said, Majella. I would concur with that entirely. I think obviously, there's some sectors that are actually doing well. I mean, obviously they're in the minority, sort of telehealth and digital health. But, we are a seed fund. We take a long-term view. We're investing, in companies where we hope to get an exit maybe in 5 years' time, maybe a little bit longer, less in some cases. So really what we're focused on, and I believe that most of the companies we're engaged with, obviously the current environment is impacting sales, but the value propositions are still there, and the world will go back to the way it was before. Some things will change, but I don't think for most of these businesses, the interest is still there from us. We believe the market is still there for their products and services. So really what we're focusing in on is, we obviously look at the long term and think, okay, the economy is going to go back to normal, whether it takes 12 months, 18 months, maybe less, nobody really knows. But we know that, in 5 years' time, we're pretty optimistic that things will be good, and there'll be a good exit environment for these companies. So really what we're focusing on now is what can these companies achieve over 18 months if we're to go in on a co-investment round of, say, 750K. What does the burn rate look like? What is their net cash burn with deflated sales? And really, I've talked to a few companies who are now saying, well, we are fundraising, but we're going for a lower amount. And, in many cases, that's really the wrong thing to do. You should be, investors want to see companies more than ever that are properly capitalized and that have extended runway. So really, what we want to see is what can that company achieve over the next 18 months plus with the investment round that we make. So, it's business as usual in as much as it can be. We're meeting with companies, we're doing our due diligence, and I'd be confident that we'll be completing investments in the coming months. Things will slow down a little bit in terms of actually making those investments until we can see, beyond the peak of this pandemic and coming out on the other side. So, there'll be a slowdown in investments actually completing, but it's really business as usual in terms of engaging with companies.
Richard, a quick question. Sorry, Martin, if I may, a quick question, Richard. I was reading some investment papers out of the US, and one of the it was a VC firm in the US, and their view was that there is a slowdown, most definitely. But he made an interesting point, which was that for them to do the investment, to complete the investment, while there's a lot of the initial video call due diligence going on, that ultimately when it came down to it, the VC wanted to meet the promoter face to face before making the investment. What's your sense on that?
Yeah, well, I've read quite a bit about that, and there are some that are, they've already met in person and they're really continuing things over video conference. But then, of course, we're meeting new companies all the time. So that is a very interesting point, and it is challenging to really get to know a promoter when you're not sitting with them in the flesh. You can go through the mechanics of the business. You talk about all the plans and everything over video conference, but at the end of the day, you do need to meet them, I believe, in person. That's the view we would be taking. So, most of the companies we're engaged with now, we've met the management teams. Many of them we've had 2 or 3 meetings with already. So,
okay. Yeah.
We can continue things, and in some cases get to completing a round without meeting them again. But I think, when we start coming out the other side of this, we will be going back to some semblance of normality, I would hope, in the coming months, around the time of, maybe completing our first investments.
Okay, thanks.
Conor, if I could continue with you, we have seen massive changes the world over in consumer behavior, in everybody's behavior, in people's use of technology. Many people are using certain types of technologies and services for the first time that they never have before. When this is all over, how do you see the world will be changed, and what are the new opportunities that might arise out of that for enterprises?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So, look, I think in terms of a context for this will pass, as Majella said, everything passes. I think the question is, what does it look like, and what does the world look like when we come out of this? And there are a lot of the changes in work practice that we're seeing now, are they temporary because they're forced upon us? And do we revert to type because we're creatures of habit? Or actually, are we seeing a fundamental shift in how we go about our business? I think for the startups and indeed the scale-ups, it is going to be a difficult, I'd have to say 6 to 9 months. I think the indicators are that the world economy is slowing down, going into recession. There's going to be a period of adjustment, and that will certainly take us to the end of the year. So there will certainly be an uncertainty around over the next 6 to 9 months, I would think. The second point I would make is that the working from home, I think, is proving a very interesting experiment, if I could call it like that, a social experiment. Because for a lot of people, they've been doing the 2-hour commute in the morning into work and the 2-hour commute back home again in the evening. And actually, we were talking briefly before this call started that productivity can often increase from working at home because, you know, you've that extra time in the day. You're probably a bit more focused on a conference call or a video call than you are in the face-to-face space. You get down to the business, you move it on, you get it done. So the question for the startup then is, what is the collaboration of the future looking like? And, you know, we see when we're looking at business plans and we see, we need to hire, we need to get an office, we need to build out like that. And maybe there's an opportunity to think differently about the type of company that you're going to build or that you want to build, and that the nature of the collaboration of the enterprise will change because people have actually discovered that it works differently. So I would think, for me, the nature of working together is an area that can be explored. The second one I would think about is, I was looking at some of these global open source projects, particularly around ventilators, which is a particular global issue at the moment. And there's a number of kind of international projects that are opening up around how could we 3D print or how could we reverse engineer ventilators to get stock into the system very quickly. And locally here, the HSE have opened up a fast track approval process. We were reading about it over the last day or two, where they're looking for new products and services that can help address the crisis, the national emergency that we face at the moment. And I thought it was interesting that if that collaboration and if that fast track approval process can be done in times of emergency, potentially that can be done as a normal course of business. So large enterprises, large procurement organizations will figure out that there are different ways to buy, and maybe the buying cycle changes and the approval process changes. I think that's kind of interesting. The other one for me throwing up from this is the hand sanitizer. So again, a global shortage of hand sanitizer, and we see perfumeries, distilleries moving into re-engineering their organizations to produce hand sanitizers for the health services locally. And they're doing that within the space of a week or two. They're retooling an organization. They're finding collaboration with other local suppliers. There's a change in kind of legislation, if required. In the US, there was a change in legislation required. And again, that proved that collaboration doesn't have to take a long time. And the question then is, are there areas, as we move out of this issue, are there areas that collaboration can be maintained and that speedy development of new products and services can be done? So a number of areas to think about in terms of working, in terms of collaboration, in terms of the procurement cycle, I think I find interesting. And then the question will come back to human behavior. So will we revert to type over the next 12 months? Or will organizations, individuals, corporates, will we say, actually, there are better ways for us to do our business? And that becomes a new way of working. And there's certainly a big opportunity there. The last comment from me would be around, and aimed at the startup, and we were talking of this with a client this morning. There is a particular period, probably for the next 6 to 8 weeks, where we're in this enforced working from home. And maybe there's a sense of frustration, going back to some of the comments from earlier on around your mental health and getting structure and stuff. To me, it is an ideal opportunity to think about, as you said, Martin, your value proposition, to think about your business plan that you've been putting off writing and kind of knuckling down to answering some of those questions, thinking about your financial model and working through pricing and your cost structures and stuff, and to really use the time over the next 4 to 6 weeks to kind of get investor ready, to use this time, work through all of those details, such that when we come out and the likes of Richard and people are coming back around for face-to-face conversations, you're in a very good position. So I would look at the positive and say that there's an opportunity if we listen to Majella, we've adjusted our costs, we've fixed our revenues, we've done all of that. Let's get some of that investor ready proposition work done and be ready for when the time comes in 6 weeks or so.
Very good, Conor. Thank you for that. Yeah, very interesting to hear you talk about the innovation that's now happening in procurement and in supply chain management. I'm going to use a phrase, it's not my phrase, but it's one that I think fits very well, which is that crisis drives creativity. And I think we have seen a lot of that, and we'll continue to see a lot more of that. Okay, I'm going to close the discussion there, just to call out that there are supports available for startup enterprises, scale-up enterprises in Ireland. If you're an employer and if the turnover in your business has dropped by more than 25%, the temporary wage subsidy scheme can pay up to 70% of the take-home pay of your employees to them. That's from the Department of Employment and Social Protection, and they can do that for up to 12 weeks. The COVID-19 pandemic unemployment support payment can pay €350 per week to employees who are made unemployed. There's also short-time working support for people who have reduced hours. On the cash flow side, there are funds available. The maximum loan available from Microfinance Ireland has increased from 25k to 50k, and Enterprise Ireland has a €200 million package of supports for vulnerable but viable businesses, and there is lots more detail on that in the text below this video. So I'm going to stop it there. Thank you everyone for your contribution, and looking forward to seeing you again very soon. Be safe and good luck.